All right. How are we doing this morning? Chris Courtney here, new Pragmatic. We got a feedback loop. I like that. I like that a lot. Got some submissions in here this morning. While we're in this pre-show, because we always have the pre-show before, and I got to make sure that CouchBot, I got to keep an eye on CouchBot over here on the other monitor. But while we're in this pre-show, had a question come over from a former student, somebody that isn't in the program right now, but they graduated a few years back when I was at another boot camp, and they had a question about whether they really needed to be a good visual designer to be a UX designer. And it was interesting the way that they phrased the series of questions. And I wanted to take a second to talk about that this morning, because the original question that came across was, do I need an artistic background to be a UX designer? And fundamentally, no. I don't believe you need to have an understanding of how paint works, or the ability to draw, to be a really good UX designer. I just don't believe that. I think that type and the organization of information are a little different than art. I think the two are. I think the two travel in similar areas, but they are not the same. Particularly when we start talking about information. The written word adds a lot of clarity that is just lost when you are drawing or painting. Okay, it's just a completely different medium. So I do think that there is a distinct difference between art and design. Okay, design is about clarity and value. Art is about expression. Okay, and when we in interpretation. Okay. But when we talk about, do I need an artistic background, that is not asking the right question, I don't believe. Because the follow-up was, I'm just not good at, I'm not good at creating aesthetically pleasing compositions. Now, that's a bit of a gray zone, because aesthetically pleasing could mean a lot of things. It could be, I know how to combine colors. Okay. It could also mean I know how to use proper headings so it makes it easier for people to read the text that I've put onto a page, or I know how to organize information in a field so that it doesn't jumble up together, or it doesn't get truncated. That's a different metric for aesthetics. Aesthetics can be, hey, this is easy to read. That's legibility. That's readability. That's not the tradition. Here we're talking about all things type. That's clearly not art. So these two things are very different. And there was still the question of, well, okay, so do I need the visual side of things? If I don't need the art side of things, can I avoid being visually competent? Do I have to worry about the visuals at all, or can I just focus on the research? And here's where it becomes a little clearer. There are tools, there are frameworks, there are websites that you can leverage to make aesthetically pleasing things without thinking about it too hard. And provided that you are okay with living inside of that box, that I'm going to go as far as this template will take me, because I'm not trying to do visual design work, I'm trying to do research, that's fine. When you're trying to do visual design work and you are portraying a template as something that you have produced, then I have a problem. Okay? But if you're trying to do UX work and you're using this template just to make it clear what you're saying in your portfolio, then that's a totally different metric. Then I think it's fine. But there is this line. It's like, okay, is it okay to use a template? Well, what are you trying to do job wise? Are you trying to go get a job doing interface design? If so, I wouldn't use a template. I would say use that as an opportunity to exercise your skills. If you're applying for UX researcher roles and you have no interest in doing interface design or front end design or any of that, by all means, go nuts. Because you're not going to get into a situation where you're being hired for what they saw being executed on in your portfolio. You're getting hired for your ability to break down problems. And that's different. But, this is where, I was applying for jobs like this, but these jobs are all open, so I shifted over here. That's where we get into these muddy little gray areas, because you started out thinking one direction and then another opportunity presented itself and you kind of scooted over, as one does when they're job hunting. Okay? I totally get why it happens. All right? But I wanted to just mention that there's a gray zone and there are considerations that go into it. There is not a definitive, you must be able to do this and you should not do that when it comes to design. It all comes down to, where are you trying to go? What are you trying to do at the end of this? And personally, what I care and what I believe I should do has no impact on what I believe you should do. And that's why early on in the program, I have people go through, and there's a hunting for jobs exercise that we do before you start the program. And it says, okay, what type of work are you trying to do? And the type of work that people pick out helps us determine where you're trying to go. And I think it's a pivotal thing that a lot of people, you never do this in college. Most boot camps don't do this. The reason I do it is I don't want to throw a bunch of crap in your way if it's not going to help you get where you're trying to go. That's the whole point. And here's a great thing. If you change your mind later, if you come through and you say, yeah, I was heading this direction and now I've decided to head that direction, that's okay. That's fine. You can always learn more. I just want to make sure that we're focusing you where you're going to be happiest. Essentially, that's what this all comes down to. Where are you going to be happiest? And if we can get you in a spot where you're happy and productive, the world's better for it. So let's do that. All right. CouchBot's fired. So I'm going to shift over to our traditional feedback loop, but I wanted to take a second and discuss this because, it's a question that comes up a lot. All right. Greetings, one and all. Chris Courtney here, New Pragmatic. It's time for the feedback loop. So good to have you along. If you're watching the later edition of this, where we chop it up and we boil it down, know that there was a pre-show moment that we recorded today that was focused on, do you need an artistic background to be a UX designer? I go check that out. If you're concerned, if you have any questions about where you sit on that spectrum, go watch that breakdown. Today we've got Katie and Abby in here, and I'm super excited because both of them are working through pretty pivotal moments of their project. Both are at the end of a project. Katie is working toward the end of Fresh Market, and Abby is working toward the end of Active Weekends. Active Weekends is the COVID-related project that's focused really on competitive research before she heads into the school project, which is where Chelsea is at the moment. So, without further ado, let's jump right on in. All right, so we've got Katie here, and right away, Katie, I can tell that you've been really busy here. Your login page, this looks really nice. Uh, you've got really great image here. I'm not certain you need the footer here on the login page, but it's also not causing an issue. So there's that. Um, when I look at this, I see forgot password listed up here, um, which is fine. If I enter my password and it's wrong, or if I enter my email and it's wrong, where does that error message show up? This, by the way, these dots, pretty big, so I might suggest going a little smaller with those. Um, let's see. Do we have an error? I'm looking for that error message. Also, let's think back to what did we discuss when we were talking about forms? When we talk about forms, the classic issue is when the placeholder text is the form label, and I start typing into here, I lose an understanding of what this form field actually is. And you've got that going on all the way down over here. I would suggest spinning back to let's just go back over here. We don't need the career material at the moment, but we do need interface. And nope, not YUI. Let's go down here to forms, form design. So when we get down to forms, one of the things that we focused on was always having those labels outside of the form field, so that we never get caught. We never get caught in this situation where, as we're typing, it's going to make things go away. It's going to make those items go away, and that's a big thing that I want to emphasize. And I can see why you might not have focused on that, because I don't even offer it as an option. It's not something that I put in front of you as something we should be doing. We should even be considering doing. It's the way that I presented it here is that it's always, if I can get back to Figma, it's always something that's at the top or off to the side. So look at that. I do think the styling is fine. I think that you've done a good job here. This looks nice. I'm just worried about where those form labels are, and then of course what happens when there is an error. Okay, that's the two things that I'm interested in from that perspective. Now, as we move up here back to the menu page main, and I want to make sure that I'm seeing the right thing, because we got prototype 2, and I'm just zooming out to make sure. Okay, yeah, that's the stuff that I had worked on last week. So let's come back down here and see where you're at with it. So again, as we look at this, we've got this shape, and my big problem with this shape right now is that you're not using components here. When I click through, this is like a rectangle. These are all individually created. And my concern is that as we go through, I'm almost certain, because these are all individually created items and they haven't been brought in as components, that we're going to have some things moving around. And I can see right away, like the star here. The star here has a position of 202, okay? And now the star has a position of 228. It's moved down. If you were to utilize this with components, that wouldn't happen. And what's going to be apparent is when we go through the prototype, I'm going to begin to see things kind of migrate around in the prototype that shouldn't happen. Additionally, there's some spacing here at the bottom with this apply. It's pretty clear, like this apply should be, this should be, well, I'm also not sure why this is a box and then this is rounded. That's really interesting that you've got a rounded edge on that box. Huh. Oh, and it's not, okay, so there's definitely something going on here with regard to that box, because there's like a rounded shape in here. I honestly can't tell you how that shape got there, why it's got the, so we need to look at that button. The button construction is concerning. And then when it comes to this shape here, obviously right now it stretches, so we don't want that, but we want some, we want equal spacing all the way around this. So if that's the case, then what we're really looking for is something like this. And again, I'm faking it because I don't want to rip apart this thing, because there is a component here, but the entire item hasn't been made into a component. And as we move over, you get there's some other stuff that moves here as well. So like for instance, nutrition here, it's changing depth, it's moving, it's not impacted by what's happening over here, but yet it has moved down. I'm also not sure why ingredients, like if, I'm not sure why it would have moved down. It's at Y position at 807. Here it's at 839. So like there's just some movement in this page that I really think needs to be normalized. Yeah. So that's something that I would definitely take a look at. Regarding, let's see here. How are we doing on the grid? Grid's okay. Grid's okay, and you've decided to give this a little more width than this element over here. If I was to zoom in on this nutrition chart, I'm looking at the spacing between these, and like how big is carbs, for instance, body copy. Yeah, this is 18. I don't think there's any reason for this to ever be 18. You've got this at 14 down below. I would really consider flipping this around, and rethinking this, because ultimately, if you were to take advantage of the column structure that you have, this would probably look a little more like protein, carbs, fat, fiber, and then you would have these charts down below, right? Like there's just not a whole lot of reason I can see that you wouldn't do something more along the lines of this, where you're taking advantage of the width of the 5 columns that you've got for nutrition, and then you're taking advantage of the 5 columns for nutrition, rather than kind of squeezing this in there in that manner. So I would take another stab at nutrition. I would definitely make components out of this, rather than just using boxes that are kind of randomly connected. The construction here is fine as far as what it's doing, but this needs to be a component at this stage, so that you can utilize it and get rid of these inconsistencies between each view. And then finally, on the login and create account, the placement of these labels should be up, and we should have some sort of idea of what happens when an error is thrown. Right now, I'm not seeing that in the designs that are here. Although, no, it's not here. Okay, so errors, error state, labels on the forms, components, and consistency on the meal. All right. If you can hit those, I think you're in a good spot to move on. Let's take a look at Abby. So Abby's got her back in the game one-sheeter. And Abby, I know you were working through this. So, the goal of a one-sheeter is pretty simple. We are laying out the objectives, what we think the company, or what should the organization that's hired us do. What are our recommendations based on the research that we've put together? Now, you've put together a one-sheeter that I think would work fine, and you lay out like what you found. Okay, so here are the facts. There's a statewide mandate. It says get the players back, and then it says averaging 30 to 40 teams in the fall, 30,000 participants a year. The past seemed to have a trend of inconsistent numbers sticking around. As the pandemic continued, these numbers are expected to be just as unpredictable. Okay. Observations. Windy City Fieldhouse shows virtual events for people to get involved, but provides no information on current protocols. Chicago Sports Social provides a prompt. Player Sports quietly hides a banner. Hot Shots acknowledges COVID. And then we have the competition, which kind of shows the same information. My problem here is I don't know what are your recommendations? What should we do as a company? Okay, if you were presenting to me, my agency is, I've hired your agency to come in and tell me, okay, what should we do? I don't know what we should do from this document. Now, part of that is I think you've generated a lot of information that you've picked up, but these key observations are fine. The facts are fine, but I've got to make way for what the recommendations are. And I don't have like a top recommendation. You should close for the season. Top recommendation, you should do virtual events. Top recommendation, you should carry on as normal. People don't care. Like, I don't see a recommendation here. And frankly, I just what I'm looking for you to do is provide a recommendation and then defend it. Like, say, here's what I think you should do based on these facts, based on what your competition is doing, based on what I've observed. Like, I need that recommendation, and that should be a significant piece of this. So you're probably going to have to edit down elements of this to allow yourself to get the recommendations in. Okay? So that's the big piece that I see missing right now. I don't have a set of recommendations to act upon. What it looks like as a one-sheeter, that's fine. That's fine. It's not a big deal at all. But I need those recommendations. Otherwise, I have nothing to go back to my team and go, okay, here's what the agency said we should do. They took a look at the landscape and they said, okay, here's what we found, and they advise that we do X. I need the X. Okay, so get me that, and then we'll reboot this again. So you're going to add those recommendations and then make an edit. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is about going to wrap us up today. Go back to OBS. All right, that's going to wrap us up today. I hope this was beneficial. Katie, it's about components and consistency, and then form labels. I think I think some of the things you did were visually moving in the right direction, though. Especially like that login page has a nice feel. And then Abby, it's the one sheeter looks nice, but it anytime you present a client with a document, remember it's not about presenting back to them what you found. It's presenting back to them something that's actionable. Here's what we should go do. Okay, and like once you get that in there, I think you'll be in a good spot. But we've got to what are the recommendations? Till I see those, I won't really know. All right. Okay, folks. I will. Hey, I've got meetings coming up with some of you here in a little bit, and otherwise, for the rest of you, I'll chat with you tomorrow.